Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
What is Awesome Health? It's actually an acronym that stands for air, water, exercise, sunshine, optimizers, mental beliefs and attitudes, and education. These are the pillars of peak health, and my team and I have created a free 12-week course that you can use to transform. Each day, you'll get a written and video lesson delivered to your inbox. Everything is covered from the foundations of digestion to advanced alternative therapies few people know about. And again, it's 100% free. Just go to bioptimizers.com. That's bioptimizers.com.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And today I'm excited because we're going to talk about kidney health and kidney optimization. And today's guest is, well, we actually met recently at a biohacking kind of event. We were working on reversing aging and a bunch of cool things. And Fiona has an extraordinary story, and she's from Australia. So you'll love the accent. I personally love Australian accents because they're so much fun. But without any further ado, let me get in a little bit about Fiona before I introduce her. Fiona Chin is a co-founder of the Kidney Disease Solution Program and Cgms supplements specifically formulated for those diagnosed with kidney disease. She is a fully qualified naturopath with over 2 decades of experience, and she is passionate about treating the person, the whole person, and not just the disease. She also works closely with patients diagnosed with autoimmune diseases such as lupus, IgA, here's one for you, nephropathy, I hope I got that right, multiple sclerosis, and Parkinson's. Fiona was also diagnosed with MS herself back in 2010, and then had a serious horse riding accident in 2015 that caused her spinal cord to hemorrhage. That's not good. Since then, she has been on her own health journey and calls herself a bit of a health maverick. And thus we met at this unusual location in Sedona, doing some very wild biohacking stuff to kind of reverse aging and degeneration and turn the clock around. Fiona, welcome back, or welcome to the podcast for the first time. I felt like we were in a podcast for a few days chatting with you, but our listeners haven't heard you. Yeah. So, it's great. Thank you for taking the time to join us from Australia.
No problem. One health maverick to another, right?
There you go. So first off, let's talk a little bit about your background and story, because I believe it was Hippocrates said that the best healers were not those who were born with robust and vital health. They were those who had serious health challenges that had to struggle through, because that cultivated and developed the empathy required to treat the whole person. Give us a little bit of background, but I want to dive right into the facts of, you've had some serious challenges, disease-wise, health-wise, and yet you maintain this really upbeat, robust positivity and it's a magnetic type of energy that I picked up immediately upon reaching you. And I think that's so empowering for people in extremely challenging places. So not only do you have the science and the background and the cognitive chops, you've got the emotional and psychological tools, obviously, to deal with debilitating conditions. So how did this all unfold? Give us the whole 9 yards, and then we'll get into the kidney stuff after.
Sure. Well, always my parents I grew up on this biodynamic farm in the middle of nowhere in Tasmania. So if people know what Australia is, you've got Australia, and then down the bottom, this tiny little island, that's where I grew up. So they were always into this sort of stuff. And I guess that Dad had lots of neck problems and used osteopaths. So I always had a curiosity around the benefits of natural medicine and those sort of things. And I'm a pretty pragmatic, logical person. So, you know, pharmaceuticals, let's talk about the MS, you know, diagnosed with that. And, you know, my options are going on cancer, chemo-based drugs. And that just makes zero logical sense to me. I'm like, why do I want to splat my immune system? I get that, but no one's done long-term studies over 3 years. All my patients that go onto immunosuppressants, not all, but big percentage go on and get cancer. So I'm like, there has to be better ways to do it. So I'm, like I say, curious, pragmatical, logical, and have quite a science brain. So you put all of that together and you get someone who has pretty much tried everything there is when it comes to natural medicine. So like you say, diagnosed with MS 2010, went blind out of my right eye. Doctor was like, it's post-migrainous. And I was running a big natural therapies clinic at the time. And my osteo and I were like, nah, this is neurological. And lo and behold, it was MS, and really got on top of that with no issues with dietary changes, using things like the Walls protocol, paleo type diet, managing my stress, exercising, all of those sort of things. So, you know, I trekked into Mount Everest in 2016 and really had no issues till I had a horse buck me off, stand on me, then fall on top of me. He really wanted to do a good job there.
Wow.
Yeah. So that caused a spinal cord hemorrhage that got missed by the hospital because they didn't MRI me, and spinal cord hemorrhages can come on very slowly. So numb feet, and then it's just slowly moved and crept up the body. So when I saw you back in Sedona, by that stage, I'm numb from sort of mid-thigh down and have loss of proprioception, which makes it hard to walk, and I get lots of muscle cramps, very much like a T11 spinal cord injury. It manifests very much that way, which is where the spinal cord hemorrhage is. So that's the health side. And then, of course, what do they say? That pain is inevitable, suffering is a choice. So that's probably that personality disposition that you met. So, and then it's just, what can we do to make this better? Because on that journey, not only, you know, do I discover stuff that will help me, but you pass it on to your patients, right? So you become this, I guess I'm the test guinea pig for anything that I recommend to my patients, be it dietary changes. You know, I worked for Joe Dispenza for a couple of years, so I'm a big advocate of meditation, down to then I fell and broke my hip a year and a half ago. So then I was like, peptides, they're my jam. So down the peptide rabbit hole, which then led me to Dr. Camp and Morgan, who introduced me to Catin, who then, you know, then I found the V cells. Man, that guy, Dr. Todd, oh, wow, what a trip he is, you know. And so his stuff, to me, I'm like, again, makes logical sense, the whole frequency sort of stuff. So I've done stem cells before in Panama. I've done 3 rounds of them. They've done nothing for me. We think that's because of the spinal cord injury. So the V cells made sense, stacking it with peptides. We've got someone smart like Catin doing all of that and overlooking what we're doing. So into that good old biohacking. So I think biohacking is really my new thing. And yeah, just like I say, I'm always looking for the new things. I'm always the first to try stuff. I was telling you before we hit record, I'm off to do the Spiro Clinic in Arkansas. They specialize in chronic regional pain syndrome. But, you know, chronic regional pain being a manifestation of the central nervous system, they're like, our stuff should work on you. So I'm like, great, count me in. I'll be the first MS patient with a spinal cord hemorrhage to come through and try that. So I'll try anything.
I love it. It's a great attitude in life, especially so many people when they get the diagnosis of a condition, or they have some sort of incident, and you've had both, that completely disrupts their lives. It's very easy to slip into, well, there's nothing they can do, and I have to do what the doctors say. Do you feel that part was your science background, or part your spirit, or maybe some combination that said, nah, I'm not gonna just accept what's told to me, and I'm gonna, you know, go off and take some, what many medical authorities would say is unproven risks or untested? How were you able to navigate those two worlds?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually, Wade, and one that I want to definitely cover, because it's really important when we dive into kidney disease. I think, you know, maybe our generation, it's a bit less with the generations behind us, but doctors have the God status, right? So when a doctor, or in my instance, a neurologist, says to me, which I was told, you'll be in a wheelchair in 3 to 5 years if you don't take the medication. In fact, my first neurologist said to me, I was a stupid little girl, was his exact words. He got fired promptly from my team, as you can imagine, because I wasn't going to take the medication. And interestingly, as he sat there across the table from me, sweating, and I said to him, and I can see because I do have my medical background, I can see that he's got an insulin pump underneath his shirt. So I said, do you have an autoimmune disease? And he said, yes. And we got into this dialogue about, well, wouldn't you look into all that sort of stuff? And do you think, wrong person to tell that I'm a stupid little girl, by the way. I gave him heck for that, because I really believe that whoever you have on your team and you work with has to be a cheerleader. I think we know now from the placebo effect and from the therapeutic relationship with your physicians or practitioners or whoever you're working with, that can have up to a 70% impact on people's healing. So the first thing was I surrounded myself with yes people that were curious like me. And then, I definitely, the scientific background, I'm also, what's the word I'm looking for? A safe risk taker. I have no problems taking things where the scientific literature will back up a feeling. I'm also very intuitive. So if I get an intuition, my whole body screams no for me taking a disease modifier. That doesn't mean I tell my patients not to. For some people, they really need to get their mind around that and feel like they've done everything. And I am all for that. But for me personally, every cell in my body screams no. And so I will back myself and listen to that. So I think part of it is I have the confidence to back my intuition. It's been strong since I was a little kid, and my parents never whacked that out of me. So that's been part of it. It also is what makes me a good practitioner. And then to the curiosity, I will dive through scientific literature. I will read it. I can sit in front of a neurologist or a doctor. Like I'm on rapamycin right now. They did trials in MS using rapamycin, and it was reversing MS. But no one puts you on rapamycin because you can't repurpose the drug. Drug companies can't make a lot of money of it if we want to get really conspiracy. And they did short clinical trials, but it's the only drug I know that is slightly immunomodulating that reverses it. People are remyelinating. Now, none of these other big MS drugs do that. So I was like, I can sit down in front of my doctor and say, here's the research. You tell me why you wouldn't put me on that versus a big chemo-based drug that's going to really splat my immune system and maybe increase the risk of cancer that has all these side effects versus rapamycin won't make it a couple of mouth ulcers. And he's like, can't argue. I'm like, great. And so I've got people like that I can work with. And I'm okay to be wrong. I think that's the first thing. And I'm okay to really be curious and dig into the research. So I think it's a combination. Plus, I'm tenacious. So, if I really have a strong intuition, I will find a way to try and get that to work for me.
Yeah. I think there's you talked about your intuition and capability to take, I would say, calculated risks.
That's the word I wanted. Thank you.
And I think that's an underappreciated skill in the world, because all of the progress in the world that has occurred since the beginning of time were people that were willing to accept a certain amount of risk to potentially discover something that was undiscovered. And considering the amount of progress we've made as a species, like we're flying around in planes and rocket ships and talking on video conferencing, and food is delivered in trucks, and we live in a world that is so far removed from even people 100 years ago. If you put them in the world today, they would be overwhelmed. They would be completely overwhelmed with what is just generally accepted as normal. And I think it's important to cultivate a certain amount of gratitude for that. And looking backwards is celebrating all of the challenges that our ancestors overcame to put us to here, but also embracing that aspect of calculated risk taking. Well, this might not work, but given what the current medical situation that you were given, and given what the diagnosis and potential things, it's like, okay, well, I don't like that. So I would rather fail in an experimentation than, than just accept the status quo, because, and therein lies the opportunity, would you say, is seeing the opportunity within a disease state or a medical condition or an injury. How has that changed you as a practitioner when you deal with your clients? Because it's one thing to kind of be a cheerleader when you haven't had that happen. It's a whole, and here is a colleague that was initially on your team who had a condition, and he's essentially reinforcing his own opinion or his own attitude around it onto you, and you had the wherewithal to reject that. How has that experience, these experiences, influenced you as a professional in the industry?
I think the first thing is, what I've learned is no one knows their body better than the person inhabiting it. Like if a patient's sitting in front of me, and I will always ask, I'll be like, we take a really good long case history, dig into the never been well since kind of scenarios, and we dig into that. And I'll always say to a patient, do you have an intuition or a feeling of what may be really contributing to the changes in your health? And then it becomes a conversation about empowering them to trust themselves, because a lot of people weren't brought up like me with, not having my intuition smacked out of me, or having even that as a sixth sense cultivated. So I do spend a lot of time with my patients trying to get them back in touch with themselves, with their bodies, and trying to almost have a dialogue with themselves about what they think might be driving it. Because 9 times out of 10, it will come down to stress, or maybe they're in a really toxic relationship, and then we can get into all the Gabor Mate stuff there. But, people will have an inkling about, okay, maybe I don't eat that well, I'm not exercising like I should, but man, I'm super stressed about my relationship with my mother and how she makes me feel insignificant. And then you will see that those things flow out into their food choices whenever they go to their family. They just say yes and eat the cake. And, you suddenly see how this trickles into areas of their lives that do impact their decisions around health, how they exercise, how they mentally talk to themselves. So I think the first thing that it really did for me was never assume I know more about the person sitting in front of me than they do, because they're the ones they always have the clue on how to heal themselves. If you can support them and extract it out of them, 9 times out of 10, they already know on some level what they need to change, what to do, what their roadblock is. So I think it's cultivating a relationship with them that is, it goes beyond empathy. It's about empowering them. I really see myself as a cheerleader. I'm not a healer. I sit on the side and I want to cheer people onto a spot where they become more authentically themselves and can become, their own health advisors. And I can help them with diet and what to take and exercise and those things along the way. But yeah, it's that, I think, that's probably been the biggest impact on me. I never, and I'm also very careful about not, as we would say, pointing the bone at person. I would never say you're going to be in a wheelchair in 5 years, because I know the power that those words have. I don't know if you've seen the studies on cancer where, an oncologist will say you've got 3 months left to live, and 3 months to the day that person will die. They went back and did a lot of tests, and half those people didn't even have cancer. It was misdiagnosed. And because they were told they were going to die by a person they perceived to be in a higher state than them, they took that on. So I'm very aware of the power of words, the power of the interaction that I have with someone, making sure people don't put my opinion above their own intuition. I really cultivate, like I say, you've got to be teachable. You've got to be okay to be wrong. Same with my patients. I'm always like, if this doesn't feel right, or something that we're doing, as long as it's not coming from sabotage, you need to have that dialogue with me. So I think it's a humility, and I think it's that really trying to empower people to be their own advocacy, because at the end of the day, I can't heal them. They're the ones that have to change their diet and do all of those sort of things. I guess I'm going to the opposite of the God complex from doctors. I think are the big things that have come out of my own journey.
Really poignant, and for those listening, it's good to adopt some of those philosophies if you're facing a challenging condition. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, because recently I received a couple of really cool products from you. around the kidneys. And it's relevant for two specific reasons. And one, that I had damage to one of my front tooths earlier, which is on the kidney meridian. And in a recent tooth, I was at my dentist the other day, and we were going over what areas that would impact. And he says, well, on that meridian level, you're going to impact kidneys, urinary tract, and testes on that model.
Wow.
Now, to my knowledge, I don't have any kidney conditions right now, but I do know that my father has some urinary challenges and some bladder issues and stuff, which is so there may potentially be some hereditary components inside of that. I don't know yet. But when you hear about kidneys, and pretty much all most people know about kidneys is that if something goes wrong, you need a kidney transplant, and you probably have to be on dialysis. And the really options are dialysis or kidney transplant, and then death. And then recently on a podcast with a very well-known individual in the industry, it was funny because we have a different dietary philosophy, and he says, well, I predict that you will have a whole bunch of oxalate problems and kidney disease and all this sort of stuff on this. And I challenged back to that, of course, knowing the power of words, and challenged him to see who would live the longest, so that the other person could read the eulogy at the deathbed.
I love it.
Yeah. So, anyways, but the point of the matter is, and the other issue is what he was actually pointing to. I know for a fact I don't have oxalate. I've done all the testing. I don't have the problems that he was advocating. So it was a nutritional bias because he's maintaining a status or an idea of a limitation or whatever, which he's projecting onto me, which I quickly and easily rejected at that point. Someone else might not have that. But how
what are you talking about too?
Yeah, but how did you kind of identify this, area of need around kidney health? And you've got a site called Kidney Coach and stuff like this. How did you get into this field, and what are you doing that's different than, say, transplants and dialysis? So maybe give us the stats about who's suffering from kidney problems. What does that look like? How does that manifest? Yeah. What are the options medically? And then what are you providing? So let's go right deep into the kidneys.
Sounds good. Well, I got into it. My nana, so my mum's mum was, she was having, I think, a hip done or a knee replacement. And I asked her, as I always do, bring me your blood tests. And she brought them back to me, and I looked at them and I went, her EGFR was like 26 or something like that. And I said, did I tell you were in stage 3 kidney failure? Stage 4 kidney failure. And she said, no, what's that? And I said, well, your kidneys are failing, your creatinine levels are up and your EGFR's down. And I'm like, that, if you don't get on top of, potentially will lead to dialysis and a kidney transplant. Like, we need to get on top of that now while your numbers are still movable. And I said, go back to your doctor. So she went back, and because she didn't have high blood pressure or diabetes, 2 leading causes of kidney disease. So she went back to a doctor, and he said, well, yes, I saw that there, but we don't tell anybody until they get to late stage 4, early stage 5, because there's nothing you can do about it. All you can do is go on dialysis and then wait for a transplant. And I was like, gobsmacked. And then since getting into this is normal. People will have their kidney function flagged early on tests. Generally, 9 times out of 10, the doctor won't say anything because there's nothing they know to do about it apart from it's a sit and wait and watch. Does my head in, because there is so much you can do.
This is an important illustration about why you need, outside of the medical mafia, and that's essentially what it is like, okay, we've got really smart, dedicated, motivated people with a very tiny toolbox of options, and they're highly regulated to make any commentary outside of that. So you have to understand that when you're going to your doctor, this is the world that they have imprisoned themselves into. And whether that's unknowingly or knowingly or that's a whole issue that you have to recognize that doctor is operating from.
Yeah.
And then someone like yourself who has maybe a more robust or alternative bag of tricks becomes an important advocate to be able to help you, the individual, determine what your doctor might not be telling you. And you know, because the old thing is a stitch in time saves nine.
Yeah.
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so essentially what you're illustrating here is that the medical model that people are using and leveraging for their health choices is built on the model of disease. And we're not going to say or do anything until you got an acute condition, because we're good at acute conditions and we're not really good at long conditions. And you're really on the preventative side or the alternative side, providing options outside of that toolbox with a different set of tools. And people need to understand this, and most of our listeners would advocate that. But whatever diagnosis you get, go out and get a couple of other ones preemptively, and also have some people outside of that industry who have professional accreditations, such as yourself, to help you flag some of these early signs. So going back to your Nana and this information and this discussion that you have, what ensued after that?
Yeah, so kidney disease isn't anything that even naturopaths really get taught. It's not one that's a lot of information. So I dived into the research and came up with a treatment protocol, because there is quite a lot of scientific research about things that will improve kidney function, that can protect the kidneys. And, she was a heavy coffee drinker and switched onto a herbal tea, put her on a more alkaline diet, and then her diet was pretty bad. So, I had a pretty big scope to make a pretty big difference, because she was coming from a low baseline. And I sent her back to her GP 3 to 4 months later. It wasn't long. And she'd gone from stage 4 all the way up to stage 1. And so her doctor was like, "Huh? What did you do?" And even I was like, "Huh? That's not the normal narrative that goes around kidney disease." And so my then husband at the time was writing ebooks. And so I said, there is a massive gap in the market when it comes to kidney disease. And the stats around kidney disease, I think it's 1 in 7 Americans will develop kidney disease. It's really high. Wow. It is because diabetes and heart disease, 2 of the biggest chronic diseases we see in the Western world, are the leading causes of kidney disease. So kidney disease becomes almost a secondary issue when it comes to that. Most people with kidney disease will actually die from a cardiovascular complication. But of course, we know that dialysis is no fun. And for people that don't know what dialysis is, you're hooked up to a machine generally 3 days a week. And it basically does the function of the kidneys for you. So it's filtering your blood, taking out waste products, putting nutrients in, balancing electrolytes, all of those sort of things, helping you alkalize. So kidneys aren't like the gallbladder or the spleen or your appendix. You can't take them out. You cannot live without them. They take up about 10% of your blood flow, even though they're tiny, they're bean-shaped. They're about the size of a fist. They sit in the middle of your back there. And the interesting thing about kidneys are they're silent. Again, if your heart's out, might get heart palpitations or elevated blood pressure. If your pancreas is out, your blood sugar levels go all over the place, your adrenals, you might get fatigue. Kidneys are pretty silent. They don't have a very big, what I would call, voice in the body. You generally don't know until you're really in later stages of kidney function. You don't get changes, and they might be bubbly urine because of high protein coming through there. It might be fatigue, itchy skin. You might be more prone to things like a bit of gout. But generally, people aren't like fatigue. People aren't thinking about kidneys being an issue when we talk about fatigue. And it's not generally until people are in stages, late stage 3 to 4, that people are symptomatic. If people have diabetes or high blood pressure, their doctors may be checking their kidney function, or if they've got a family history, people are a little bit more switched on, because nobody, when they've seen a family member go through dialysis, nobody wants to do that. You lose, advocacy of your life in a sense, because you are hooked up to a machine waiting for a transplant. So the stats around kidney disease are pretty scary when it is 1 in 7, and it's been driven by 2 of these biggest chronic diseases that we see in the Western world. So, and they're so silent, and doctors aren't flagging it. So we've got a whole pile of issues when it comes to kidney disease. The good news is, with the narrative around kidney disease, it's incurable and there's nothing you can do. That narrative, I can tell you, is flat out incorrect. There is plenty that you can do. The kidneys do heal themselves. We've got, having set that up, that program. So that going back to my nana, we did all of that. My husband was writing ebooks. He wrote a program, which was the kidney disease solution. That was going for all the way up until COVID, until, we were getting feedback from patients that trying to find the supplements was hard. And we were like, why don't we make them ourselves? We can make far better quality, and we can put all the Chinese herbs particularly in one herbal capsule. So we started that, and that just took off beyond our expectations. I've just redone the kidney disease solution ebook into an online platformed program to give people very in-depth training. I want people to be able to sit in front of their nephrologists and know as much as I do about kidney disease, so they can have this dialogue that we were speaking about right at the beginning and challenge them around that. So kidneys do heal. Kidney tissue, the thing that leads to a decline in kidney function is fibrosis inside the kidney tissue. And it's that fibrotic process that we now know how to test for, and we know that certain herbs and nutrients will reverse. And then especially you need to treat the drivers. So again, treat the person, not the disease. We have to make sure blood pressure is managed. We need to make sure microcirculation through the kidneys is getting in there, so the kidneys are getting nutrients and oxygen and blood flow. We need to make sure that your diabetes and high blood sugar levels is managed, because diabetes makes the blood look like syrup, and that's what your poor old kidneys are filtering, which is why they get damaged. So, and then there are other drivers, inflammation, oxidative stress, all of those things that happen in chronic disease, and fibrosis. They're the hallmarks of chronic kidney disease. So we look specifically at measuring that and reversing that through diet, nutrition, all the stuff that you showed up before.
That's very robust. There's a couple of things I want to dive into here in regards to that. So what are the conditions that lead to the degeneration of kidney function and ultimately to the diagnosis of disease? And how many of those are under the individual's control, in your opinion?
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at masszymes.com.
Let's talk diabetes, unless you're type 1, but even type 1, if you can get your blood sugar levels under control, and we can see there's some great research coming out around using ketogenic diets and things like that, you won't go on to get kidney disease if you can really manage and stay on top of blood sugar. Type 2 diabetes is a lifestyle disease, as we know, so that is 100% under the control of the individual. High blood pressure, again, I would say very lifestyle. There's so much you can do around modification of diet, exercise, stress reduction, nutrition, you would know, like magnesium, all of those sort of things. So again, I would say hypertension is definitely a lifestyle disease. And then other drivers, they might be your autoimmune diseases like lupus, IgA nephropathy that you mentioned right at the beginning. Those to a degree are a little bit more challenging, but still, same as MS, they're still manageable via lifestyle as far as reducing what we know drives kidney disease, which is inflammation, oxidative damage, fibrosis. Those things very much can be modified via lifestyle changes. So I would say for 99% of the cases, it's manageable. Polycystic kidney disease is a little tougher. You've got 4 major things that drive that through things like mTOR pathway and Cgms and quite some technical pathways. You really need to hit all 4 pretty hard. With that might be a little bit trickier, but most of your kidney diseases and causes can definitely be modified and at least slowed down, and you can get the reins on a bolting horse by changing your diet and lifestyle, and even reverse and improve kidney function.
Well, you talked about a couple things, and I want to ask about maybe a couple of areas that we hear in the world that may or may not be true. And that is, is too much protein a problem? Is too much calcium a problem? What are the agents, I would say, that we hear about, that the oxalates is good as is that legitimate that they can contribute to kidney condition, or is that overblown because of very narrow research information?
Both, but the potassium story is definitely overblown. You have to avoid potassium if you've got kidney disease. That narrative drives my nana in. That's very old research. The ATAGI guidelines have changed around that. If someone's diagnosed with kidney disease, 9 times out of 10, a renal dietitian or a doctor will say, go on low potassium. We now know that if you go on a low potassium diet, when it's not indicated via a blood test, you will accelerate the decline of your kidneys, because your potassium comes from all your green leafy vegetables and fruits and vegetables, all the stuff we want you to be eating. People go on a low potassium diet, take all of that out, and that will actually elevate blood pressure and all of those sort of things. So the potassium model is well and truly proven to be incorrect now. The protein model is still true to a degree. So what happens when kidneys have a fibrotic process in them? You've got to imagine, with fibrosis, the tissue hardens. When you have protein coming through, which the kidneys do have to filter, they've lost that flexibility. Protein's quite a big molecule. So what happens is protein punches holes into the side of the kidney tissue because it's lost its flexibility. So you get this protein spillage going into the urine. So you get elevated protein in the urine. So one of the things that we do recommend if you've got kidney disease is to take things like red meat out and decrease protein. We do know in the end stages of kidney disease, you can go on a very low protein diet and then put in keto analogs, which is protein with all the nitrogen and the TMG issues taken out, issues taken out, and that can prolong people and keep them off dialysis while they're waiting for transplant. So the protein issue is due to fibrotic issue. And that is true. Definitely a lot of protein, you have to minimize it, but not to the degree that people would think. We're not looking at putting people into protein deficiencies, because you need protein to heal tissue, for your immune system, all of those sort of things. So I prefer to go down a really good healthy fat route. That seems to help, because we know fats with cell membranes gives the flexibility back, right? So we go on a more plant-based ketogenic type diet in those later stages of kidney disease, which seem to work really well. Other myths, like you can't have magnesium, a lot of those electrolytes, unless it's proven on a blood test, and it's generally only in stages 5 that you might see that. They're a bit of a myth. The calcium oxalate pathway, we do see that, and it's really, I blame a couple of influencers that really started to talk about oxalates, and oxalates really just took off as far as being a problem. Some people do have issues around oxalates, generally from a genetic point of view. They're not producing enough bile. Again, we've got to look upstream. I think looking at the end result of oxalates is limited. If you've got a good bile production and you're stacking oxalate foods with enough calcium, which will bind the oxalates and pull it through, you shouldn't have oxalate issues if you're doing your foods correctly. And it comes down to, if people are eating a high oxalate diet, which are things like raspberries and spinach and kale and all of those sort of things, and almonds and things like that. Again, we never are a proponent of taking oxalates out. It's just oxalate management, and then working with why the oxalates are out in the first place. And it will come down to either not enough bioproduction, not stacking calcium properly, and changes to the microbiome. We know now, with food and pollution and glycophosphates and all of this sort of stuff, that our microbiome has changed over time. And it's the microbiome that's really responsible for helping make sure that our oxalates aren't stacking. So again, rather than just going, you're going to have an oxalate problem. Let's look at your gut. Why is your microbiome being like that? Let's fix that. It's about always going upstream to where the issue's coming from, rather than the end of just saying you have to take all oxalates out. I don't think you're a very good practitioner if that's your end all to someone, because there'll be a reason why, right? So we need to dig into that.
Yeah, one of the philosophies that we advocate at Bioptimizers is you're not what you eat, you're what you digest, absorb, and utilize. And if you're not digesting, absorbing, and utilize something, then any food or anything that you consume can then become a toxin. And of course, that's going to vary based on your genetics, and expressions of a phenotype from your genes is oftentimes related to your diet, your lifestyle, your environment. So many of the so-called toxins are merely your inability to metabolize that or deal with it, and triggers it. And so some toxins are going to be okay for some people, and some are going to be just, death sentences for others. And so these broad-based statements tend to fall apart on the scrutiny of large numbers. So we advocate, get a genetic test, try and look at your genetic optimal points and your suboptimal components, get your digestive health in order, which is enzymatic activity, your hydrochloric acid, and then your microbiome based on whatever diet that you can sustain for a long period of time. But diving into the kidneys per se, I want to go from that, because now we're talking about a very special component here that your medical doctor is not going to identify for you if you have these things, and we want to stop that. So what are the kind of things that you look for in a test, or who is qualified outside of maybe the traditional medical model that could provide insight for a person if they want to, hey, you know what, I want to live my best life, I want to prevent, or a bunch of family members have had this, I should consider doing this. What would you suggest that they look for, and what type of tests would be helpful in determining how to have great kidney health, or catching something early, or revert and then reversing that? We'll get into the reversing side after.
Yeah, no, great question. So the first one is blood pressure. That can be a silent thing, right? So we know you've got elevated blood pressure, those tiny little blood vessels that run through the kidneys and filter everything. If you've got a high elevated blood pressure that's got high blood pressure through the kidneys, you're going to damage the tissue in there. That's going to cause the immune system to infiltrate it, and it's going to start that fibrotic process through the inflammatory cytokine process. So making sure your blood pressure is under control is the first thing. Simple test anyone can do. They can get a home unit, that sort of thing. The next one is blood sugar. I'm a big fan, like if you take a finger prick test of fasting blood sugar, I also like to make sure you get your HbA1c, which is an average over 3 months. But I love these new continuous glucose monitors that people are getting into. I think everybody should hook themselves up to a CGM sort of for 2 to 4 weeks, 2 to 3 times a year. The thing I love about CGMs is it'll give you, if you get a spike, say in blood sugar levels or a drop, what we're looking at is a stress process that's going on in the body. So I actually use it to pick up food allergies, because you might get a spike coming up in blood sugar levels to a food that you think, well, that wouldn't do that. They're eating quite well, but it's because the cortisol's going and you're getting the stress response, you're getting a change in your endocrine system. So continuous glucose monitors can give you a big amount of feedback about how your sleep is affecting your blood sugar levels, your stress levels, your exercise. I've
seen coffee throw people's blood sugar off, which like black coffee, and you think, well, how's that possible?
Yeah, exactly. Some people have these massive, I'm one of them, these massive cortisol reactions. So I love those CGMs. I just think more than just even kidney function, just the feedback about how foods are influencing you, you get so much out of that. So they're tests that people can do at home themselves, really simple. Then if we get into the more complicated tests, you've got the ones that they generally run for kidneys, which is your estimated glomerular filtration rate. I always suggest people have that done if they don't have kidney disease twice a year. You want it above 90. Anything below that, when it starts to creep down, you need to go and look straight away. Kidney function goes slowly and then it goes quick. So if you've got an EGFR sitting around 70, you're already in stage 1. You've got to go figure out what's pushing that up. And that estimated glomerular filtration rate is done via a formula that's looking at your creatinine levels. So you'll have a rise in creatinine versus your age. So creatinine's the other thing to look at.
I have a quick question on creatinine, because I also know that for athletes, creatinine can be elevated.
Yes.
So can you kind of explain that model for athletes, someone that works out a lot or whatever, and the influence on your creatinine levels?
Great question. So that leads me into the other test that you need to look at. So what happens is, if you're an athlete and you're exercising a whole pile, you're going to break down muscle. When you break down muscle, you have a release of creatinine. So if you're someone like me, I'm in the gym 6 days a week, right? Even though I take my protein and my branched chain aminos and I take all my Bioptimizing great stuff there, you still might get, even if you're trying to do all that mop up and make sure that you're sustaining muscle tissue, if you're doing a blood test right after you've had a heavy workout or even been for a heavy run, you may have elevated creatinine in your blood, which may then give you a false decrease in your EGFR. So definitely, like body athletes that are doing lots of weightlifting and physique athletes and things like that, you may get this false reading. So if that's happening, then you're better off getting something called a Catin C reading, and that will get around this creatinine breakdown issue. So even people with kidney disease, Catin C, now the research is saying it's probably more accurate to let you know what's happening with kidney function. Catin C doesn't move around. Like an EGFR can bounce around quite a bit because of exactly what we just spoke about. Whereas Catin C isn't going to do that. The other new test, and I have to remember the abbreviation for it, but it's a marker of fibrosis, and it's human growth factor beta 1, I think it is, but I might need to go and double check that for you. But it is it's a marker of fibrosis. So they use it for lung fibrosis, they use it for liver fibrosis. But if you've got an elevated marker and your lungs are good, your liver's clear, it could indicate that there's some fibrosis going on in the kidney tissue. But I like that as a marker because we know fibrosis tends to be an end byproduct of chronic inflammation and oxidative stress. So when you start to see fibrotic changes and you see a change in this reading, I'm pretty sure it's human growth factor beta 1. And again, it's a new test that they're doing for lungs and liver, but definitely can be utilized for kidneys. If people have really, chronic kidney disease, stages 3 to 4 onwards, I'm recommending that they get that done, because that's the reading you want to change. If you can change the fibrotic factor, you start to get this flexibility back in the tissues inside the kidneys. That is when you'll start to see your kidney function improve. And that's the marker that I now look at to make sure that I'm doing my job as a practitioner, because that's the flexibility that I want to get back. I know directly if I can improve that marker, kidney function should get better. So I'm like always looking for what I need to do to make sure that that marker's moving. And other tests that functional practitioners will do are the cytokine panels. Doctors will run your ESR and CRP, or high sensory secretory CRP levels, C-reactive protein. But again, there are so many cytokines in the body, like interleukin 6 and 10 and 11. We know interleukin 11 has a direct effect on kidneys. They've got a test or a new drug, I think they were trialing kidney disease, where it decreased interleukin 11 and it was reversing kidney disease. So getting your interleukin levels tested through a functional practitioner that can do a full cytokine panel will give you some insight as well. So there are other tests that are going to give you much more information. And then I'm a big advocate for gene profiles as well. I think when you know that, and microbiome tests, GI 360 and things like that, we're always looking higher up the chain. And like I say, the big drivers of kidney disease and at least end stage changes to kidney tissue are oxidative damage, inflammation, fibrosis. So they're the things you want to be keeping an eye on. And then alkalizing, the kidneys are really important for keeping you alkaline, or keeping your pH and your homeostasis, big word, but that means making sure your blood pH level stays in a perfect range. That's all kidneys. And when you get changes to kidney function, you'll find it's harder to stay in that range, and we go on to get metabolic acidosis, which can kill people. So that's why we are big advocates of also an alkalizing diet, because you want to take that pressure off the kidneys. And so the kidneys are putting their energy into healing versus just trying to keep this homeostasis, because they'll always put that as a high priority, because we know even a slight change in pH in the blood can end up with people having a coma and going into this metabolic acidosis. So, yeah.
Okay, so one more question before we get into the supplementations that you've developed as part of your programs that you use. And that is, when you talk fibrosis, recently, I think it was in the European Union, a lawsuit happened that was proven that people who took the AstraZeneca jab had side effects that were not mitigated for or advocated for inside of the medical industry and avocation. And there's a tremendous amount of coroners who are finding fibrosis issues inside the body as an unexpected side effect from people who've taken the jab. And feel free if you don't want to comment on this, but is there a potential need for more awareness about the development of fibrosis for people who have been subjected to taking these, essentially, widespread experimental drugs that was forced on the population, both from our medical industry, our media industry, and our social communities, which had a damaging effect. And now we're finding out, that, hey, maybe they weren't as safe, as effective as was being told to us. Is there an increase are you seeing any increases on fibrotic or fibrosis or related to kidneys or other areas of the body? Is that just conspiracy, or is there any legitimacy on that?
No, it's a great question, Wayne. I didn't know that about the increase in fibrosis, but it makes sense to me via those biochemical pathways and how they could possibly work. And I definitely agree with the sentiment that it was hugely experimental, because most clinical trials they're 10 years in development for developing this that rushed. So, I think it's naive of anyone to say that it wasn't rushed, because of the process that generally any sort of vaccine or medication would have to go through. And it didn't go through that. It's as simple as that. So that's not conspiracy. That is fact.
Yeah.
So it is experimental, and we're not going to see the long-term effects. What we are seeing, we're seeing increase in heart myocardial infarctions, and young people on the fields just dropping dead. We're seeing an increase in cancers and a few other bits and pieces. Now, can we link that back? I don't know. It's very timeline of this happened. Now we're starting to see that. I'm not a big believer in coincidence. So potentially that's all linked in there. I've only just started testing because it's quite a new test that's come out for this fibrotic marker. So, of course, I am seeing a rise in it because I've just started testing for it.
Right.
So that correlation is simply because I've just started testing for it and I'm looking for it. But I would be interested to see, in tissue in general, if we're seeing an increase in fibrosis. And I can understand maybe the mechanism. Fibrosis is very much driven by immune processes, and immune bodies are almost starting to clog that up and attacking tissue to the point the tissue becomes fibrotic. And that, if you think about the fibrosis process, it's driven by chronic inflammation. And if we've got adjuncts going into the body that are working on the immune system, potentially driving a different kind of inflammation, or the body's seeing it, a vaccine, the immune system is reacting to a vaccine. That's the whole point of it. It's producing antibodies and things like that. But we don't know the long-term effect of how that chronic immune reaction to a vaccine is working. And maybe in the background, it's driving certain immune cells to increase this fibrotic pathway in tissue. It logically and common sense, that is very possible. Because we don't know, and we've not done these long-term studies to see whether, if an immune system, due to maybe genetics or other things like chronic stress or other infections, can't re-regulate its inflammatory process, and you've got an extra thing now put on top of the body where it's trying its best to make sure inflammation is in its control. Inflammation is controlled. You need to have the right level of it. We're starting we're already, from our poor diets, lack of exercise, stress, sugar. Now we've put these things on top. We're driving inflammation through the Western world anyway. and you've got people that can't modulate that genetics, or because their buckets were already full, we are just weighing people more towards that inflammatory process. So it wouldn't surprise me, is what I'm saying, and it would make sense.
Right on. Thank you for that commentary. I think that's really appropriate and balanced for people to recognize. And inadvertently, whatever the situation is in your life, we can always find ways to mitigate what's happening. And there's a couple things here that you've developed that was sent to me called the alkalizing formin for kidney stage 1 to 3 and kidney prime, a couple of herbal remedies. Can you explain these two products,
Sure.
why you developed them, and how and who would use them and how would they use them? I think that's really important for us to understand, because I've not seen formulations develop particularly around kidneys. And so I was extremely curious about this because I believe that it may be of significant benefit to a lot of people. And so I want to know more about it. So you can tell me about those products.
Sure. Well, let's start with the alkalizing formula. So I sort of mentioned earlier, the kidneys are really responsible for keeping our blood in that pH range that we need for staying alive. And we know that most of our Western diets are quite acid forming, high protein, meaty diets. And again, if you're someone that doesn't have a kidney issue, your body can re-regulate that. But, I go back to our hunter-gatherer times. They were eating meat, but it was pasture-fed, so it was really high in essential fatty acids and really nutrient-dense, not this farm slaughterhouse grain-fed stuff that we eat now. We're eating completely different meat. So highly inflammatory, highly acidic, and then sugary foods, takeaways, fried foods, they're all acid forming. If you eat good quality meat with a whole pile of vegetables, which is what our ancestors were doing, which is, technically basically Paleolithic, that's still alkalizing. I think that's a good way to go. So what happens again in chronic kidney disease, Western world, we've shifted towards more an acid environment inside the body. That puts extra pressure on the kidneys. So the alkalizing formula is to basically help alkalize the body. Now, lots of people use bicarbonated soda. The problem with that, and you will be right on board with me with this, is it kills your gut. You are weakening your hydrochloric acid. It is very short acting. It actually long-term can cause acidity inside the cells. And we know as people get older, your hydrochloric acid levels are going down anyway. So then you're not breaking down your protein properly. You're actually going to contribute to an acid environment by knocking out your hydrochloric acid. I am not an advocate of using bicarbonated soda unless you're in very late stages of kidney disease and you have elevated magnesium proven on 2 blood tests to show that your kidneys can no longer regulate magnesium. That's the only time that you might put in some bicarbonated soda. And on top of that, you would be using Bioptimizers, hydrochloric acid, enzymes, all of that stuff to make sure that you're not going to knock out, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. We don't want to knock out gut health, right? Makes no sense. So
I remember the first athletes they were using it in sprinters to alleviate the lactic acid buildup, and they were hitting the dosage, and literally guys were crapping in their pants on the field because of the digestive. So they didn't quite have the dosages right.
No.
So imagine the layperson trying to figure that when you have elite athletes who are monitoring everything, literally crapping their pants because they didn't get the dosage right. And you're going to try and self-regulate that yourself. It's a disaster. And of course, the importance of high acidity in digestion. So there's important components where acidity is important, and there's important components of alkalinity, and your body can regulate that. And if there's a dysregulation, some of those agents are not going to be helpful. But good news is you've developed a formula in order to address that. So can you explain that for us?
Yeah. So again, not a fan of sodium bicarbonate, but citrates are amazing. They naturally alkalize the body. And then because we know that diabetes and cardiovascular disease are the leading cause, magnesium deficiency is probably one of the biggest mineral deficiencies we're seeing modern Western world. Stress will, as soon as you get stressed, your body chomps through magnesium. So magnesium citrate is a really fantastic way to alkalize. It doesn't knock out the hydrochloric acid. It doesn't cause alkalinity in the gut and in the stomach specifically, as you said, where you need high acidity to break down your foods adequately. So it doesn't do it that way. It works through a buffering system. So it's moving bicarbonate and hydrogen ions around inside the cell. So you get proper intracellular alkalization, get the added benefits of having magnesium in there, which will help with high blood pressure, balancing blood sugar levels, and all those sort of deficiencies. So, and then in the other form, we've got a formula for stages 4 to 5 that does use a bit of bicarbonate, but then we're using zinc citrate. So any of the citrates will help alkalize, but there's been so many studies done now that magnesium citrate is a much safer way to do it, and a much more effective way in kidney disease. Also in that formula, you'll find taurine. So many great studies done on taurine, kidney health, blood pressure, cardiovascular system. Sour cherries are in there. They're nice and alkalizing. They help clear the acid buildup that can cause gout. So if we're looking at that, it also makes it taste good. It's got a bit of nettle in there, so some mild diuretics, and also nettle. I'm trying to remember what else we've got in there. That all helps. A bit of vitamin C, I think, as well. It all helps with alkalizing the kidneys, kidney function, cardiovascular sort of stuff. But the citrates are mainly what we're using to alkalize in there without knocking out the acidity that we need in the gut for health and breakdown of proteins and other bits and pieces.
That's great. Now, you also have another product called Premium Kidney Support, Kidney Prime.
Yeah.
And this is a combination of some, I believe, some very interesting herbs.
Yeah.
Who uses this, and what is it for, and how do you take that?
So the core part of our protocol is Kidney Prime, Kidney Advance, right? So the Kidney Advance is the nutrient version, the Kidney Prime's the herbal. And we separated them because I'm all about synergy and making sure formulas are going to be the best, and herbs tend to work together. So it's a bunch of Chinese herbs. They are antioxidants, anti-inflammatories, and a lot of them reverse the fibrotic process inside the kidneys. Chinese herbs have been around, and traditional Chinese medicine has been around for thousands of years, I want to say, a long time before the advent of pharmaceutical medications. They're very safe. They're improving microcirculation through the kidneys. So again, what happens in kidney disease is we get the loss of circulation going into the kidneys. They're not being filled up with the nutrients they need, so the tissue becomes necrotic. It becomes fibrotic. It's not getting oxygen. It's not clearing toxins out of there. These herbs improve microvascular circulation through there, especially Dunshen is one that does that. They help lower blood pressure. A lot of the herbs in there regulate blood sugar levels. So they're looking at the drivers of chronic kidney disease, being diabetes and elevated blood pressure for the bulk of kidney disease that develops. Then we're looking at the anti-fibrotic process, the antioxidant, and anti-inflammatory. So I want herbs really in a dovetail effect, so which means the synergy between the herbs to hit those three markers, which is antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and anti-fibrotic. And the anti-fibrotics do that mainly by increasing the blood flow through the kidneys. So we did a lot of research on that. If you go and do a PubMed search, which is a proper, not a Google search, it's a PubMed looking at scientific studies behind each of the herbs, you'll find a plethora of studies done on those herbs inside, looking at kidney disease, decreasing creatinine, all of those sort of things. And I think it's important to mention, and I'm sure you would have mentioned this on your podcast before, but a lot of people say, well, why aren't there hardcore scientific studies done on herbs and kidney disease? And you've got to remember there's no money in herbs, and running scientific studies and tests like that are millions and millions of dollars. And if you can't patentize a herb, you can't, because nature has the patents on that, not drug companies. So there's not a lot of money put into these sort of tests. So a lot of the studies are animal-based, rat, mouse, but a heap of them are also human trials. Then we've had, we've had maybe 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 people use our supplements, and we're getting the feedback where their EGFRs are going up. We're getting all those improvements. Both these products go into clinical trials in hopefully January, February next year. We're just waiting to get onto the next part of that. So anyone with kidney disease, that's the kidney prime is part, it goes along with the kidney advance, which is just your alpha lipoic acid, N-acetylcysteine, and CoQ10. They're very kidney protective. We use those two together in basically looking at doing those reversing of drivers. So like I said, inflammation, oxidative stress, and fibrosis. And then outside of that, you're looking at treating the drivers, be it, do you need to bring down blood pressure? Are we looking at dietary intervention, or is it you've got an autoimmune disease, then we would treat that. Is it your microbiome, we treat that. But those kidney prime advance make the core up. So we're basically supporting kidney tissue to be as healthy as possible while we do the mop up, basically.
I love it. It's really powerful. And is it something that people stay on for an extended period of time? Is it a daily thing, a monthly thing? How does that work for the individual?
Yeah, depending what level of kidney disease you have. So
is it only for people with kidney disease, or?
I take it. Do you know that there's a herb in here called Foti, which stops your hair going grey? And so I went on that. My grey hairs have disappeared. So
wow.
Yeah, it's a good old traditional Chinese herb for that. Foti also, I'm a Clotho. I don't know if you know much about Clotho, but Clotho is a peptide and a gene in the body that reverses aging. So it lengthens telomeres. There is so many studies now to suggest that if your Clotho levels decline, and you can go and look at the longevity studies done on rats and things like that. But if your Clotho levels decline, you are going to age faster. It not like the age, how it ages you is crazy, but Clotho will decline and it will cause kidney disease. So there's this
correlative aspect
that happens. Yeah, in fact, Clotho testing, which there's no reliable testing for Clotho yet, but when it is, that will be one of the best markers for kidney disease, because Clotho levels will decline 10 years before you'll even see changes in kidney function.
Wow.
So Foti, that herb in there, and there's a couple of others, cordyceps, they boost Clotho levels. And we know that Clotho is anti-aging. When you boost Clotho, you're going to remyelinate. So I actually take it for MS because the Foti and cordyceps in there are myelin supporters via this Clotho pathway. They're also anti-aging. So that's a bit of a biohacking formula. It's got the telomere length on there, boost your Clotho levels, that sort of thing. So I take the kidney prime every day. As far as how long you stay on it, it depends where you're at with kidney disease. A lot of people stay on it till they can get their kidney function back to a good level, and then they try and maintain that through diet and lifestyle. Some people just decide they get such good results with it, they just decide to stay on it because they're not interested in their kidney decline going any further, but they might reduce the dose. So really for me, I'm looking at it, again, if you treat the person and not the disease, you would stay on this until you could hopefully get your kidney function. And some people can recover their kidney function fully, depending how much damage you have, how much fibrosis, all of those things. It's going to vary person to person. So some people stay on it. Other people can get their kidney function back and then they can maintain it through diet and lifestyle, which is ultimately what we want by maybe looking at microbiome and looking at all the drivers, getting your blood pressure under control, blood sugar. That's ultimately what we want. We don't want you to have to stay on it forever because we want to cure you or get your whole organism functioning better, that you don't need intervention. But because kidney disease is such a late stage to so many other changes in the body, it's why it's so silent. Often people will have to stay on them just to optimize their kidney function. It just depends where in the scale of kidney disease you are and how much vitality you've got left in your body, basically.
This has been super informative, and I'm sure a lot of people who may have early stage of kidney dysfunction that doesn't know this could benefit from this. So if you're someone who has aspects that you're concerned about, maybe that's a family history on it, you're getting a little older or whatever, and you want to kind of avoid dialysis or a kidney transplant, where would they find more information about you, your products, how they can, get informed, so that then when they see their GP or their specialist, or preferably a naturopathic doctor to provide some alternative solutions, they know what they're talking about and can ask the questions and kind of reverse the tables of just saying, okay, well, some people are speaking some really long Latin sounding words, they must know what they're talking about. To be able to be an informed advocate for your own health and vitality. So where do they reach you?
So then go to www.kidneycoach.com. On there, you'll find a heap of free downloads. We write articles every week that are pretty science laden. So you'll see proper research articles. We're not just making stuff up. We've got a YouTube channel as well. You can head to Kidney Coach. Lots of great information on there. And then we've got Facebook pages, Instagram. We're posting every day of good information. But if you head to kidneycoach.com, all our products and everything are there. And then I'd say the YouTube channel like yours as well. Great amount of free information on there that you can get. But if you want to do the programs and things like that, all of that information is on our website.
Awesome. Well, we'll put all this in the show notes for our listeners so that they can find and access this information. Just might save you your life and certainly a debilitating condition or treatment program. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's, I think, early morning over in Australia right now, is it not?
Not too bad. It's 10 a.m. So
that's pretty good.
Yeah,
okay.
You didn't get me out at 5 a.m. like I have to sometimes.
Okay. Well, anyways, it's a delight to have you and reconnect, of course. Hopefully we'll get to see you on your next trip out to Sedona. I'm hoping to be living there at that time. So it's a high likelihood. For our listeners today, I hope you take action on this or provide this information from someone that you know who may be suffering from kidney conditions. This information could help you. It's coming from a well-researched person, someone who's had her own challenges, but has some great information to provide you what you need to do to make a difference. And that's what we do at the Awesome Health Podcast, helping you achieve awesome health. I'm Wei T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers. Thanks so much for joining today. We appreciate it if you like, share, and subscribe to the podcast if this was of value to you. Take care and have yourself an awesome day.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion. And a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora. And of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.